I need to tell you, my name is John Daggett. I am legal counsel for the Pacific Union, and I'm also privileged to serve as legal counsel for a number of the conferences. I have to tell Randy, my grandmother, my late grandmother, you were her absolute favorite. She was bedridden for quite a while and would spend a lot of time watching you on satellite. If she were here, I'm sure she would tell me to sit down and have you come back up. But we need to move along. I think it's very clear to everyone here that the legal side of this is probably the most insignificant side, and I will agree with you. I'm going to take as little bit of your time as possible. Bylaws is first. Then we move on to a question of ordination. Bylaws is first because, in essence, it's a housekeeping matter. I was asked my opinion about whether I felt the bylaws posed any kind of barrier to moving ahead with ordination. I can tell you what I found is that there's a lot of confusion and disagreement over whether they do or whether they don't. I think that's very clear to each and every person here today. If you look at the bylaws, they say in Article 3 that they use the word all purposes, policies, procedures, etc. I'm sorry I don't have it right in front of me because I've got such a tough act to follow. I don't even have my notes in hand here. Where's Article 3 here? Okay. All policies, purposes, and procedures of this union shall be in harmony with the working policies and procedures of the North American Division and General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. The Executive Committee recognized the significance of the ordination issue, and you, as the constituency, being the highest voice in this union, and you, the delegates representing that constituency, they need your direction, they need your vote on this issue so that they know how to proceed. My advice was, look, bylaws say what the bylaws say. There's disagreement about whether they would or would not be violated by this vote. I can tell you, some of you may not know this already, but in looking at the bylaws already violate. The bylaws themselves, not talking about practices of the union, but the bylaws themselves already violate this provision of the bylaws. They're internally inconsistent. They're, for example, and I'm not going to go through all the detailed examples, but amendment. Okay, you look at the amendment provision. The NAD working policy is very clear about what model bylaws are supposed to say, and the unions differ in many respects, including the amendment provision. Bottom line is, to be brief, as legal counsel, I like to see consistency between governing documents and practice. Okay. What are the bylaws? The bylaws are essentially internal rules that this union has adopted to help direct, especially the Executive Committee, when they're operating without your input, what they should and shouldn't be doing. Whatever happens on the bylaws vote today, again, my recommendation and the Executive Committee's recommendation is to vote the amended change so that you can be consistent with other practices as well as this upcoming vote. But the reality is, regardless of what happens on the bylaws, you are being asked in the second portion of the agenda to give direction to the Executive Committee on the issue of ordination. And I know it's difficult to separate the two, but we'll try and move through the bylaws on the issues related to the bylaws themselves, and then move on to the bigger and greater and obvious issue that we're called here today to discuss, which is the issue of ordination without regard to gender. I'd like to turn it over to Brad.
Thank you, John Daggett. John and I have gotten to be good friends as we've talked in cars, and we've talked on teleconference. I'd also, first of all, like to acknowledge our Bylaws Committee that served. If you are here as a Bylaws Committee member, would you please stand and be acknowledged? We want to thank you for the work that you have done. I said in another forum that no one gets misty-eyed or swelling of heart when we talk about bylaws. And usually I've got a Bible to preach with today, but instead I'm going to give you a report on behalf of the bylaws in which I was honored to serve and as the chair. And so I want to give you, after Attorney Daggett has given you some legal context, I want to give you the rationale that your Bylaws Committee is bringing to you today, and then you can consider that. At every constituency session, we amend our bylaws. We do this because our bylaws are a collection of instructions that guide the union committee and the union staff as they help the Lord's work to move forward in our territory. As the work changes, the instructions change. For example, until recently, most conference bylaws in our union required that all delegates had their materials mailed to them. Well, now we have email. Many conferences have now changed their bylaws to include electronic distribution. Sometimes the changes, though, are more substantial. For example, when some conferences have changed from electing departmental directors at constituency session to asking the executive committee to appoint them, they had to change their bylaws so that that would reflect the reality that they wanted to follow. Now, I'd like you to take your document today that's entitled Bylaws of the Pacific Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. And now I can hear the snap of Velcro as we all open up. I will trust by faith that you have read this document very carefully prior to our arrival. You may be thankful that at this special session, you had only a short little bit of reading to do to know what we were going to talk about. But I want to give you some context for those few words. First of all, let me just say that after reviewing, we're on page 5, Article 3, Relationship. You'll notice the second paragraph that the change is suggested. The Bylaws Committee was called upon by the Executive Committee to review and make recommendations to the constituency, to you, regarding our bylaws and ordination without reference to gender. The committee's recommendation on that request is as follows. I will read it to you. It says, strike the word all and add in general, comma, the policies, purposes, and procedures of this union, strike shall, add will, be in harmony with the working policies and procedures of the North American Division and the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. It is our recommendation that you adopt this language because we believe that it does two things. First, it clarifies this constituency's ability to authorize ordination without reference to gender. Though this body may decide to amend the bylaws and still not approve ordination with regard to gender. The second reason for the recommendation is this. It remedies other existing inconsistencies between our practice and bylaws document. In other words, the current wording does not accurately describe how the Pacific Union, or probably any other union, works, so we should consider changing the words. Why do we believe that this amendment is helpful and even necessary to the work of our union? To answer this question, I have 3 important books that I have brought here this afternoon. Each defines the work and defines us as Seventh-day Adventists. I will address them in ascending order, or descending order. This is a book that I hope that you all have and have all read. If you can't see it, it says, Seventh-day Adventists Believe. This is an excellent commentary which describes the 28 core doctrinal teachings of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This book outlines our Bible teaching on subjects like the Sabbath and the Second Coming and marriage and family relationship and creation and many more topics. Now I want you to note back in your bylaws in that relationship statement, the very next sentence is after the one that we're going to be proposing the amendment. Note in the relationship section of our bylaws, that next sentence, right after the one our committee is suggesting we amend, notice what it says. This union shall pursue the purposes of the church in harmony with the doctrines, programs, and initiatives adopted and approved by the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists in constituency session. Today's proposal keeps the Pacific Union in lockstep with all the church doctrines. And that's very important for you to know. I have a second book here. This book is one that I think many of you have read, especially if you're a pastor or a local church leader. This is the Seventh-day Adventist Church Manual. This describes how we do the work of the church, where the work of the church is primarily done, the local church. It's an important book. You should read it. You should be acquainted with it. The amendment proposal that we're talking about today has no effect on anything that's in this book. The third book that I want to hold up to you is a book that I would guess that very few of, if any of you, have ever read. I can almost pick out the names and faces of those who spend time with this book. This red book is entitled North American Division of the General Conference Working Policy. This is the current edition. Now, even though probably most of you haven't read it, you've been hearing an awful lot about it for the last 100 days. And I'd like us to talk about this a little bit. This North American Division policy book describes how conferences and unions are to conduct the business of the church. Here you can read in this book all about boards, committees, finances, retirements, school teachers, pastors, chaplains, higher education programs, how to do departmental work, I'll take a breath, and scores of other topics. Every fall, leaders from all over North America gather together at the General Conference Headquarters Auditorium, in which they look at adding policies to this book and deleting policies from this book and modifying policies in this book. This is in itself kind of a living document as well. These policies are very, very important. And they are important because they are the standard of best practice of how we do the work of the church. They're the accumulated wisdom of people who think long and hard about how we do the work of the church. The officers of this union and the executive committee make every decision with these directions close at hand. And when the General Conference Auditing Service comes to audit our books, quote, every year, they not only look at the money, but they ask the question, are you following North American Division working policy? The Bylaws Committee proposal is designed to provide a modicum of flexibility for those rare circumstances when the executive committee or this constituency concludes that to keep the work of God moving forward in the Pacific Union, to do what our bylaws say, quote, to promote the worldwide mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that a voted action of this constituency or the executive committee may differ from a North American Division policy. Now let me explain to you how this proposed change can better align our practice and our bylaws. And I'm going to use an illustration that we all can relate to: money. Every year, the North American Division Executive Committee, which is made up of people from all over the conferences and unions of our territory, vote a cost of living adjustment or not a cost of living adjustment. We've done more of the latter recently. Through policy, this action becomes the policy of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists, and a policy which we are to abide by. The Pacific Union Executive Committee has, in general, implemented this policy of increases or no increase. However, there have been times when implementing this policy has not been financially responsible. When faced with a pay increase that would mean cutting back workers and evangelism, the Executive Committee has voted to not follow policy and not authorize the increase. Now, this is done for the practical purpose of keeping the most people and the most evangelism, the funding working for God around our territory. However, there is no provision in our bylaws which formally permits this departure from policy. The departure from policy, however, advances the work of God in our territory. This proposed amendment remedies this practical dilemma. Let me give you another example, the second. It's one that Attorney Daggett alluded to already. This proposed amendment helps us in the very bylaws that you hold in your hand. These bylaws reflect the voted actions that you or others in your place took in previous meetings. One such action answers a question: who can be the Pacific Union Conference president? Article 9, Section 2 states this: the president who shall be an ordained or commissioned credentialed minister of experience. This is not in North American Division policy, yet you or previous delegates voted this change with a 2/3 majority because you believed it furthered the work of God in the Pacific Union. And our legal counsel has noted that you may do that. But the proposed bylaw amendment would create an internal consistency with that type of action and what currently exists in your bylaws. So, basically, we have the choice. You have the choice of changing our bylaws to reflect the reality that we do not always follow policy, or leave them the way they are, which you may do, and not worry that there is some inconsistency. For our entire 110 years of existence, the Pacific Union Conference has operated faithfully and in unity with the work and mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that will not change. In fact, the current wording in our bylaws that we have now was only added in 2001. So, for 99 years, we have been in perfect harmony with our church's worldwide work and mission. Why? Because we are Seventh-day Adventists. And the addition of 3 words does not and will not change that. The Bylaws Committee believes that this amendment, consistent with the legal advice of our attorney, best describes how we currently promote the worldwide mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Pacific Union. And with these few words, we also believe, as Mr. Daggett has mentioned, that this amendment language removes any ambiguity about voting on ordination without reference to gender. But the decision, delegates, is yours. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Bylaws Committee, I move the amendment to our bylaws which reads, in general, the policies, purposes and procedures of this union will be in harmony with the working policies, procedures of the North American Division and the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists.
It's been moved and seconded